This video seems wildly out of date, but as I'm new to BookTube, I thought this would help anyone who's viewing my videos to get a better feeling for whether my recommendations are something that they would want to follow up with or not. This was originally uploaded to my other channel, Analog Holly, before I decided that I wanted to move my book-related content to a separate channel. Because it was originally on my photography channel, it did have a different intro, so I've added this new intro and re-edited just to make sure that it makes the most sense over here. If you're interested in the alternative introduction, which talks about how I relate my fiction reading to my creative practice, then I've included that at the end so that it's easy to skip if you're not interested. But if you are interested in how I tie those things together in my mind, then you can watch that at the end. So here are my top 5 and bottom 5 books of 2021. If you're interested in purchasing any of these books, then I've included in the description a link to my my storefront on bookshop.org, which is an alternative affiliate link which supports indie bookshops, whilst also giving me a small percentage for making the referral. In the list that's over there, there are all of my 4 and 5 star rated books where they are still available new. There are obviously some books that I have bought secondhand that are no longer being printed, and therefore you can't purchase them from those indie bookshops. That list also includes both fiction and non-fiction, so there's a much larger list over there. This is just the top 5 and bottom 5 from my fiction reads. I'm not going from, like, the last one is not going to be my favourite, vice versa. These are just 5 books that I really recommend, that I thoroughly enjoyed, and why I think they're important for other people to read as well. Okay, so let's start. The first book that I'm going to start with is actually the last book that I finished in 2021, and that is Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi. This is about a Muslim family living in the UK. The dad is deceased, but he was an extremist, he was a terrorist who went off to fight the war in Raqqa. And so it's the story of the children who have lost the mother as well. There's twins and their older sister who has raised them. One of the twins who ends up following in his father's footsteps and going off to sort of discover more about his father, but ends up being part of the extremist military group. And you get to hear about it from different perspectives. So you get this perspective of the older sister, you get the perspective of the boy who goes off to join the war, you get the perspective of his twin sister and her boyfriend. It's quite heartbreaking at the end, but I think it's a really good look at another perspective. Like, I don't know what the lived experience of Muslims is like, and this kicks off straight away with the older sister being interrogated at the airport when all she wants to do is go off to study in America. So it's a really good read. The second book I'm going to recommend is Nick Hornby's Juliet Naked. I was really surprised by this. I read this because it was on a list of books that can be studied for either GCSE or A-level in the UK for English literature. I can't remember which one. And I assumed it was just going to be like a rom-com. I thought it was going to be a bit of a cheesy, I don't know, like, what do they call it? Chick lit or something, I think is what it's commonly known as. Basically, romance and stuff. But I was so surprised. I devoured this book. What is amazing, and why I think you guys watching this channel might enjoy it, is that there's a really good look at art appreciation. So Juliet Naked is not about a nude lady, it is about an album by a musician who's not produced any music for a really long time. He then brings out, or at least distributes to some people, an early version of his last album, which was lauded as his best album. It's told from the perspective of the girlfriend of a gentleman who is obsessed with this album, with this artist. They then break up and she ends up meeting the artist in question and finding out the story behind everything. There are all these conspiracy theories basically about what this artist is up to because he just dropped off the face of the earth. And what you end up getting is this look at basically obsessive fans. We get to hear the perspective of the artists themselves and what they were creating and how they felt about it. And then you get the perspective of someone who appreciates the music but isn't so intense about it. And I was just so shocked by the reflective nature of it and the look at art. So actually a really, really good read if you're into art theory and things like that. It's about music, obviously, rather than art, but I think it all the concepts being discussed apply here. Number 3, we've got His Only Wife by Piaccio, I don't know how to pronounce it. Based on the cover, which is very pretty, I thought this was going to be another light, sort of romancy, chick-litty book. It reads like a thriller, but it's about a woman from a poor family who ends up in an arranged marriage to a very wealthy man. And this is all in Ghana, and it's really good at setting the scene. I don't think I've read many books that are set in Ghana or in Africa in general. So that was really nice to sort of be transported to a different place. The couple that gets married, it turns out he's in a relationship with another woman, and the family have arranged his marriage because they want to draw him away from this other woman who is Nigerian. And there's a lot of racism between the Ghanaian family to the Nigerian lady and all these awful things that they say about her and her customs and how she lives her life, which obviously end up not being true. But yeah, it reads like a thriller, so it was really good, absolutely fantastic. Number 4, I've got On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. Going into this, I thought it was going to read like a classic, and I don't really enjoy classics that much. I try to make sure I read classics, but I generally don't enjoy the reading experience of them. I find them very slow, very repetitive, very descriptive, and not a lot happens. So I was pleasantly surprised by this. It's a relatively modern book. I think it was published in 2007. Yeah, 2008. And it follows a couple who've just got married and they've gone away for their wedding night. They're staying at a hotel. You're sort of following the build-up as they're eating their dinner, and they both know what's going to come, what they have to do, what's expected of them. But it's set in the 60s, and you get this amazing tension in the writing from the traditional pressures that are on them, but then also the liberal thinking, because we were in this time of real change in the 60s, and it comes across so well, and I just loved it. I was so surprised. Do you know what? That's the thing about this. I was surprised by basically every book that I read that ended up being on my favourites list. I thought Camilla Shamsi's Home Fire would be too hard-hitting for me. I thought Juliet Naked would be chick lit. I thought His Only Wife would be chick lit. And I thought this would be too slow, and I read it so quickly. One of the best things that I found about this book, I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but the lady in it, I mean, you know this from early on in the story, so I don't think it's ruining it, but the lady doesn't like the idea of sex. She is really repulsed by it, all the thoughts, but she is trying to overcome her natural instincts because she knows it's what she has to do. On the one hand, you're like urging her in your mind to just get on with it and do what you have to do in a relationship. And then there's this other part of me that's going, well, no, why does she have to do that? You know, why do we have these pressures to conform to traditions? There is nothing that stops you being married except for tradition. If you don't consummate the marriage on the wedding night, like, the consummation of the marriage shouldn't have to mean anything. I mean, there are people who just want to be in a relationship but are perhaps asexual. I really loved how this challenged my perception of certain things. So yeah, another brilliant read. And then finally, on my favourite reads of 2021 is Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith. She is most famous for writing The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is, you know, a movie and all sorts. But this one, I'd never read, so I haven't read The Talented Mr. Ripley yet. I've seen the film before I knew it was a book first. But I picked this up, and I've got to say, I picked it up because the cover was beautiful. But then I was intrigued by the blurb, which is, Vic and Melinda Van Allen seem to be the perfect couple, but appearances are deceptive. There is no love left in their marriage, only jealousy, and Melinda enjoys flaunting her affairs. When one of her lovers is murdered, Vic hints that he was responsible. As rumours spread, it's only a matter of time before Vic really does have blood on his hands. So I was drawn in by that because I love a bit of murder, I love a bit of thriller, I love a bit of horror. And this was a really good, I think they call it a domestic thriller, but it's basically following two essentially psychopathic characters. So they're completely unlovable characters. It was just really good. Really, really good. Two of the books I want to talk to, I listened to on audio, so obviously the reading experience might have been different. I do find certain books are better in audio and certain books are better in more physical form. For instance, I prefer classics on audio. I find it more engaging, whereas certain other stories I find better in physical format. So it may be that these two books just weren't good on audio. So the first one I want to talk about is Girls of Slender Means by Muriel Spark. I think Muriel Spark is quite a well-known author. I've seen loads of things by her. I think the most common one I've seen is one called Memento Mori. But I downloaded the Girls of Slender Means because I think the description of the book sounded really interesting. It was talking about diet culture in post-war Britain. That wasn't the main theme of the book, but that was definitely like an undercurrent. You know, how many calories does this have amongst the girls staying in this? I don't even know what it was, like a safe house, a boarding house or something. But this is the thing, like I just didn't seem to absorb very much information from it. It just didn't spark any interest. I didn't feel like anything happened. It felt very confused, and yeah, so that's why it's on one of my worst books, because it was just so when it had such promise. The second book that I listened to on audio, it's another classic, unfortunately. It is H.G. Wells' The First Men in the Moon. I downloaded a compendium of H.G. Wells. So it had The First Men in the Moon, it's got The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and then I think some more, but I haven't got that far yet. I've only got to The Invisible Man so far. I absolutely loved The Time Machine, thoroughly enjoyed that, loved how that explored themes about culture, society, intelligence. Oh, it was just brilliant. But The First Men in the Moon is so long and so descriptive, and I just hated it. I really hated it. I think I ended up skipping like a massive segment and ended up not missing anything. So yeah, I just really didn't like that one. I'm sorry. I'm going to go for this one, The Mercies. This, unfortunately, was really hyped up. I saw so many people getting excited about this book, and I'm not surprised, because the premise of it is amazing. It's about an island. In fact, let me just read it to you. The storm comes in like a finger snap. Winter 1617. The sea around the remote Norwegian island of Vardø is thrown into a vicious storm. A young woman, Maren, watches as the men of the island, out fishing, perish in an instant. Vardø is now a place of women. 18 months later, a sinister figure arrives. Absalom Cornet has been summoned to bring the women of the island to heel. With him travels his young wife, Ursa. In her new home and in Maren, Ursa encounters something she has never seen before: independent women. But where Ursa finds happiness, even love, Absalom sees only a place flooded with a terrible evil, one he must root out at all costs. So, I mean, that just had me captivated. I really wanted to read this. I ended up getting it on my Kindle for 99p, and then it came in physical format in one of the book subscriptions that I used to have, which was Book of the Month. So I ended up being quite disappointed by getting it, because I'd just paid 99p for it. So I felt like I'd been ripped off with this book subscription. But nevertheless, I read it, and there were so many promising moments in it where I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be an interesting concept to explore. And for about the first third, I was really happy with it and really thinking, oh god, this is going to be amazing. And then it never went anywhere. It was slow, it was repetitive, and none of the like hard-hitting themes that I thought it was going to explore ended up being explored. It just, to me, it just fizzled out and was nothing. Whilst I appreciate this may well do it for some people, it was such a disappointment for me. Next one is The Two of Them by Joanna Russ. I got like a bulk stack of these women's press science fiction books from somebody on Facebook. And Joanna Russ is one of the more famous authors that was included in that stack. So I thought, I'll try that because I've heard her name and it's relatively short. I thought it would be a nice read. I mean, I didn't know what to make of the premise. These are science fiction, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of science fiction, but I thought we'd give it a go. The back says, Irene, maladjusted teenager turned trans temp agent, star lover turned outlaw. Her destination, Ala Ed-Din, planet of claustrophobia, of underground cities and no horizons, where women are kept in purdah. Her charge, Zubaydah, child of crystal veils. Her calling as a poet blocked in a world where only men are free to rhyme. Her co-worker, Ernst, mentor and lover, now her most unexpected opponent. Irene stole her own freedom, now she has brought Zubaydah's. The price was murder, and there's nowhere to run but Earth. I'm not really sure that any of that really happened in this book. Just so confusing. It wasn't long enough to explain anything that was happening. So what is the trans temp agency? I don't know what that means. What is a child of crystal veils? Just, it had such a promising sort of premise, and then nothing really happened, and anything that did happen I don't even understand. It was just really confusing. But I have since been looking at other reviews of it, and so many people have said this is one of her worst books. Like, do not judge Joanna Russ based on this book. So I will read another one of hers at some point, because I do have another one from this collection. But terrible book. And then we come to the final one, and the one that I think is the most interesting on this worst list, and that is Snow White by Donald Barthelme. Snow White is Donald Barthelme's raunchy and hilarious reworking of the classic fairy tale. Eschewing the formalism of earlier genres of fiction, Barthelme experiments with style and voice, taking the well-known characters of childhood and recasting them as sexually active and psychologically complex paradigms of postmodernist satire. His writing possesses a fantastic humour marked by a straightforward presentation of the absurdly grotesque, indicating the irrational nature of our everyday world. So I was really excited to try this, especially as it was nice and thin. I thought this is going to be a fun read, an interesting read, but it was awful. Like, the reading experience was horrendous. I don't understand what happened. I was bored. Really awful. But the reason this is interesting is because I ended up really keen to research the author, to research this idea of postmodernist writing. Like, what does that even mean? Are there other books that relate to it? So there we have it, guys. You've got my 5 favourite and my 5 worst books of 2021, and why. We are not photographers in isolation. Everything that we have experienced, everything that we do, everything that we read and watch and hear adds to what we end up photographing, how we end up photographing, our thought processes and everything that's encompassed in the act of photography. On that basis, you can't really do photography videos without incorporating some element of your lived experience. And I think that's what I want to explore a bit more this year on this channel. I have an online learning log which has the same name as what this channel used to be called, School of Holly, where I wrote up articles that were about things that I was learning, things that I was interested in outside of photography, but that I very much felt fed into my photography practice. Things about books I was reading, I was learning about art history, world history, social justice issues, and various other topics. But I am a strong believer in the fact that all those things feed into my photography, they feed into the projects I want to do in my photography, and they feed into what I want for this channel. And so this year, I want to be true to that, and I want to start incorporating more content that brings other things from my interests into my photography.